Sergeant McNeil. I'm going to talk to you about our small arms today. So you saw our large caliber ordnance on the wall firing. That was a 24-pound smoothbore muzzle-loaded gun. So this weapon here is our small arm. We're going to go through a few other weapons as well that were used at Fort Henry. This, of course, the year is 1867. This fort has been in operation for quite some time. The original fort here was constructed in 1812. It was a wooden palisade fort, a bit smaller in scale, but it was located on the same grounds at the top of Point Henry. And when that fort was built, we were using a much different weapon than what we're using here today. So starting from the beginning then, I'm going to show you here, this is the brown vest, or the India long land pattern musket. It's a smoothbore weapon, 72 caliber, very, very large caliber. Today we use something more to the more similar to like a 223. This is 72 caliber. It's much larger. The reason why it's so large is this is a black powder weapon. The shot is being fired by black powder, which is not a very efficient explosive. So the round is moving very slow. So the way we compensate for that is by making a very large round. So when it hits a person, it's going to cause a lot of devastation. A lot of kinetic energy is going to transfer through. The weapon is smooth bore inside. So inside this barrel, there's no rifling. There's no corkscrew. To give you guys a better idea, if you're to head up to the wall, up on the ramparts and look at our 110-pound Armstrong gun, you can look clear through the breach at the back. You'll see rifling in there. It looks like a corkscrew. This weapon does not have that, which means that when the shot is fired, the ball is not a tight fit. It's not being encouraged to spin as it leaves, and the ball is really actually bouncing around inside the tube. This weapon is, the caliber of the barrel is 72 caliber, but because I'm loading it from the muzzle, it is actually, the ball is actually 68 or 69 caliber. So there's a little bit of wiggle room on either side of the ball as it exits, so it can come out at odd angles. Now this weapon here is a flintlock weapon, so the way I fire this weapon is different than the way I fire the next two weapons I'm going to show you here. Flintlock means that the way I ignite this is, first thing I'm going to do is I get out a charge. My charge is a preset casing. It's made of paper. Inside the paper is a measured amount of black powder and a ball. I bite the ball off and keep that in my mouth. I'm going to pour a small bit of powder into what's called the flash pan. So there's this shallow little bowl. It sits just on the outside and to the right of the barrel itself. And I'm going to put a tiny little bit of black powder in that flash pan. Then I'm going to close up my frizzen, which is a cap, so that when I bring the weapon upright, my powder isn't going to fall out. I pour the remaining powder into the muzzle, then I drop the paper in there to give a little bit of wadding, spit my ball into the barrel, take my ramrod, and I need to ram everything down nice and packed. By the way, to know that this weapon is safe, you hear that ting? That tells me that the weapon is not loaded. Now, I need to return my ramrod to its original position. If I lose this thing, this weapon becomes extremely useless to me. You'll notice that because this weapon is so long, I have to load it standing up. It's very long because the longer the weapon is, the more time the powder has to burn, which means the faster the ball will be traveling when it exits the barrel. So I have to load this standing up. It takes a long time for me to load. Other hazards with this weapon is that if it's wet or if it's raining or humid out, very, very humid, the powder, which is all exposed, may not actually fire. It may become too damp to fire. If it's windy out, I may lose the powder in my flash pan. Also, if I fire this weapon in line, I may not know if the weapon actually fired because I have 100 people on either side of me firing along with me. So the next problem with this is that if I end up loading 2 or even 3 more charges in here, not realizing that it's fired, and then the weapon discharges, the breech will blow, and I'm going to have a less pretty face afterwards. The way that this weapon actually ignites the charge is with this piece of flint stone, which is why it's called a flintlock musket. So the hammer has teeth, which are holding in the flint. When I bring the weapon to bear on the target and pull it, the hammer slides down the frizzen, the the flint is going to strike off this steel and create a shower of sparks into the flash pan, which will hopefully ignite the main charge by a small vent that is connecting the flash pan with the inside of the barrel. So again, this weapon is very difficult to fire in rainy or windy or humid conditions. I have to load it standing up. Because it's not rifled, it is extremely inaccurate, and it's also very slow to load. I can load this weapon about 3 times a minute, so it has a lot of problems with it. That being said, this weapon is extremely cheap to produce. It has very few parts. It's extremely simple to operate. And it was actually the longest serving weapon out of the 3 that I'm going to show you here today. So this weapon, the brown vest, was introduced to the British in the early 1700s, and it sees service all the way up to the 1840s, and even after that in reserve units, and then throughout the British Empire in the colonies. So it is a very effective weapon for its day. The maximum accurate range of this weapon is about 90 yards. So you'll see that soldiers march in line, they fire in volleys, and they fire at each other at very close quarters. Because the weapon is inaccurate, the most effective way to use this weapon is to fire in volleys. Everyone firing together on a single target. Hopefully, 20 or 30% of the people will hit their target, and the rest of them, you make a big loud noise, there's lots of smoke, it's an extremely frightening thing to see. So that's why everyone fires in line. Now, the 1840s roll around, the British are looking for some new technology to continue to compete with the French and the Prussians. They need a rifled muzzle loader. So the Enfield is their solution. This weapon is introduced in 1855. It's called the Enfield. This weapon is still loaded from the muzzle. However, the barrel inside is rifled, and the ball that you load in is much tighter. So it's a very tight fit. It takes a little bit longer to load. However, because the barrel is rifled, when the shot is fired, it's a soft lead ball. When lead is heated up, it expands. It'll engage the grooves inside the barrel, and as it comes out, it's a tight fit, so it should come out straight out of the barrel. The rifling is going to encourage it to spin. That's going to make it more aerodynamic. It'll be able to cut through the air much more efficiently, which increases the range and accuracy of the weapon. So the brown vest has an accuracy of about 90 yards. This weapon here has an accuracy out to about 250 yards with a trained soldier. The drawback with this weapon is it does take slightly longer to load, so you're looking at closer to about 2 times a minute fire rate with this weapon. This weapon is in service from 1854 all the way up till 1866, so it does not have a very long service period compared to its predecessor. It is quickly replaced because even as the British are introducing this weapon, the other empires, the French and the Prussians, the Russians, they are introducing new technology. They're firing breech-loading weapons where you can load in your powder and everything from the breech. Now with this weapon, the way that it fires is similar to a way a bullet fires today, except that all the pieces have not been put together yet. You have your powder, you have your ball, and then you need something to ignite it. The flash pan is not very effective in rainy or windy conditions, so they introduce a percussion cap. How many people here have fired a cap gun when they were a kid? Or if you are a kid, you're familiar with cap guns, just a little strip of chemical ignition. When it's struck hard, it creates a controlled spark. We're going to place that percussion cap on this nozzle here. When the hammer strikes it, the spark goes directly on top of the powder inside the chamber. So as long as I keep my main charge dry that I'm loading down the barrel, I'm able to fire this in rainy and windy conditions. So it's much more efficient. There's more reliability of actually discharging your firearm. However, there's still the risk of overloading the weapon. There's still the risk of it not firing because of a faulty percussion cap or wet charges. So in 1866, the British want to replace this weapon with a breech-loading weapon that fires a bullet. That is your black powder, your ball, and your percussion cap all rolled up in a nice brass casing. It's airtight. You can fire it in the rain. I don't have to stand up to load it because I'm loading it from the breech, so I can load it kneeling down, laying down, God forbid hiding behind a tree where I'm not going to get shot at. It's a much more effective and intuitive way of loading a weapon, and I can load it much quicker. So the British don't want to buy a whole bunch of new weapons. They just bought these ones 10 years ago. So in 1866, they put out a competition to fix an opening breech to their existing Enfield rifles. The man who wins that competition is named Jacob Snyder. He's a wine merchant from the United States. He failed to sell his patent to the Americans. They did not think that it was worth their money to refit their Springfield rifles with opening breeches. So he goes to the British, he sells his patent, and the British introduce the Snyder Enfield. This is a retrofit of the muzzle-loading Enfield. And all he did was take the barrel off the stock, cut off the last 3 inches, screw on an opening breech. What you do with this weapon here is you pop open the breech, you service your round forward in the chamber. It's only a single shot. There's no magazine, so you just push your round forward, and then you close your breech. The hammer, which used to hit the percussion cap, instead is going to hit a pin. The pin travels through the breech and taps the primer, which is located at the back of the bullet. This is a much more effective way of loading a weapon. So with this weapon here, the accuracy is also increased. Because I'm loading it from the rear rather than from the front, the caliber of the ball can be almost exactly the same caliber as the barrel, which increases, it tightens up the round inside the barrel and increases your accuracy. You don't have any more gas leakage around the ball. So this weapon here, by any odd-trained soldier, is accurate out to about 300 yards. There are recorded hits with this weapon out to 900 yards. So this weapon is a very effective weapon for the 19th century, even the 20th century by comparison. This weapon also increases the soldier's rate of fire. We go from 2 or 3 times a minute with these muzzle-loading weapons to 10 times a minute. So this weapon is much more effective for your average soldier. Drawback with this weapon, though, is because it is a retrofitted weapon, this gun was never designed to be fired 10 times a minute. So it does not have a very solid stock on it to protect the soldier from overheating. This barrel will get red hot after firing 30 or 40 rounds through it, so soldiers have to deal with burnt fingers, very badly burnt fingers. The weapon itself can get jammed. I have to manually extract the round by pulling the round right out of the chamber with my fingers. That causes a lot of problems with soldiers. So it's not a perfect solution. It's introduced in 1866 and quickly retired by 1871 when it's replaced by the Martini Henry, which is a weapon that is a little bit more familiar for folks. What I'm going to do now is fire off the weapon for you and show you how I actually load and shoot this weapon. And then, once I'm done that, I'll take some questions from you. All right, Sergeant Major. There you go, Sergeant.
He is about to fire, so if you have sensitive hearing, I would advise you to cover your ears at this point. He will fire 3 shots. You can gauge it by the first one how loud it is. It's not too loud, but if you do have sensitive hearing, please cover your ears.
So as you can see, I can load and fire that quickly. I can load it from a kneeling position, which is easier to get an accurate shot out if you're kneeling or laying down compared to standing up. Not a user-friendly weapon. I've actually already cut my hand open by extracting my rounds, and that happens quite commonly. So it's a stopgap measure, but it does keep the British up to pace with the other empires. Through the 1860s, however, they're not at war with any major empires. They are at war with inside many of their colonies, and most of those soldiers are ill-equipped compared to the British. So this weapon is extremely effective and allows the British to maintain their colonies through the 1860s and the 1870s and during that period of transition. I'll take questions now.